Hello, and welcome to another fully live Tuesday Q&A episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have a very special guest again, Alex,
Hello.
who is my co-host on Hack5.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so today we are going to go with a mix of different questions. We're going to be taking some of them from our stream, and we're also going to be taking some of them from Alex's recent Hack5 videos. And if you haven't seen them, Alex, how would you describe the subjects of your recent Hack5 videos?
Pretty cool and intense.
I guess on a technical level, if not how awesome they are, which I do agree with. They are pretty cool and awesome.
My most recent one covers war driving, which is a really interesting topic to me, which if you're not familiar with, it's like geolocation for Wi-Fi. You can drive around, walk around or something, and have a device that's capturing a bunch of Wi-Fi data and basically pinning it on a map so you can see where certain Wi-Fi devices are located. So that was my most recent video on how to analyze Wi-Fi or war driving data through Python. I've also started a series on basic hardware prototyping, so you can also check that out all on Hack5.
Yeah, so we got a lot of really great questions on this. Some of them stemming from people who wanted to build their own war driving rig, or from other people who wanted to know about different types of microcontrollers they could use to accomplish basically the same thing. Now, what kind of got people's imaginations firing, I think, is because we actually used a drone and created an ESP8266 based war driving kit, which Alex will basically walk you through creating your own if you want to stay tuned to Hack5. But for now, a lot of people were curious as to how we did this or how effective it was. So if you have any questions related to war driving or war flying, or creating your own war flying or war driving device, then feel free to ask us in the chat because, yeah, we got a lot of really great questions from that. And of course, we're going to go back over the questions that were left on the YouTube channel. So if you left a question on the YouTube channel, then rest assured we will be answering it today. So without further ado, maybe we should pull one up from the YouTube channel.
First one by Diva Kiron.
All right.
Can you make a video about Raspberry Pi Pico and hacking? I haven't looked into the applications of the Raspberry Pi Pico for hacking, but I do know it has a bunch of extensive features for like HID because it has like built-in. I think it uses the I forget what chipset it is, but it can do like keystroke injection, emulation of some types. So I guess we could look into that.
Right, so this is definitely a step above like a DigiSpark or something. If you're creating your own, you know, like wireless, or not wireless, just HID device. But a lot of the things people were asking was about wireless stuff, like how do you do like Wi-Fi like hacking with the Raspberry Pi Pico? And that's one thing. It doesn't have Wi-Fi, so I've kind of steered clear of it. And that's really my primary thing is I really like connected things, and my focus is on Wi-Fi. So a lot of the stuff that I would want to do, it just can't really do without interfacing it with another module. And also I have a ton of SparkFun Pro Micros, which are actually pretty easy to program to be an HID device. So because I just have so many of those Pro Micros, like I already can do a lot of the stuff the Raspberry Pi Pico can do, but not everything, obviously. So I'm actually really excited to start looking at this microcontroller and trying to figure out like what we can do with it, because it's become very popular. And a lot of the guides that I've been using for like MicroPython and some other really cool stuff are specifically written for the Raspberry Pi Pico. So it seems like definitely something worth checking out. You know, I hear some compare. I think it has like native USB, I think, which might be something that's really useful for people that just want to drag and drop a project instead of like learning how to flash or use ESP tool. There are a lot of really attractive things here. Like, for example, again, for people using CircuitPython or MicroPython, like the appeal of being able to use a native USB device is that you can just drag and drop stuff instead of using AMPI or some like sketchy method of putting a file on a microcontroller. So yeah, there could be a lot of really cool advantages here. And if you know anything we should check out with the Raspberry Pi Pico, especially interesting projects people are doing, please let us know, because we want to cover them and maybe we can expand them a little bit or strap them to something that flies. Who knows? So yeah, that's a really good question. And semi-relatedly, I know that there's some other Raspberry Pi products. What's the other one that looks like a little blade server, kind of? I'm blanking on it. Zam has one and he's very excited about
the
it.
compute module?
The compute module, yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it is. So
I really want to get one.
Yeah, so apparently a vendor reached out to us. I think it might have been like Seed Studio or someone, I think it was, that had a open source router that I think it's like OpenWRT or something, that runs off of that. And it's been kind of like made into a really neat little like product that is hackable. And for us who are always looking for like cool ways to set up like Wi-Fi hacking games or ways of taking a crack at hacking routers, then this is a really interesting and cool product. So we might take a look at more Raspberry Pi powered products as well, just to see if these sorts of things that are based on Raspberry Pi are really commercially viable or useful when they're made for kind of a single use project. So we'll see. But yeah, very good question. Thank you for asking.
Should we take another from the channel or from the chat?
Is there a good one in the chat yet?
I haven't seen. So
okay, then listen to the channel. If you're not watching, listen to the channel.
Is it possible to transform the ESP into a Kismet drone? Not Kismet. We can use it for war driving generally, but the way the Kismet API works is vastly different than just what we would be able to do on the ESP8266. I did write code that would interface with the Wiggle APIs, so you're able to create files that can upload like directly to Wiggle if you're interested in that.
I also wanted to just say hello to everyone in the chat. I am watching it. I was just looking at something else for a second, but it's good to see Zam and everybody else in the chat. Again, if you have questions, we are watching, so we will try to answer them, and yeah, we appreciate it. But for my answer for this, I would say Kismet is really cool because it does a couple things that are useful for us as hackers. It keeps track of client devices, so it's not just listening for like access points. It's listening for clients as well, and it also captures like the full packets for all the stuff, so we can go back and analyze it and look for stuff. So that's really cool because the ESP8266 has some limitations, and you could never really emulate like a Kismet-like thing with the ESP8266. Why, Alex?
Well, first off, Kismet, you can capture on both bands if you're using a card that allows you to do so.
That's true. I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
Much more processing power because presumably you're going to be running it on like a full-fledged Linux computer like a Raspberry Pi or something like that, which offers a lot more leverage than a small microcontroller would be able to.
What about the length of the packets on the ESP?
I'm actually not sure.
So the ESP8266 clips packets at a certain point. So when you're receiving packets, you could never use, like, have you ever used an ESP8266 to grab a handshake?
No, I haven't.
Why?
Because I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, it's actually not possible.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And the reason is that compared to the ESP32, which actually I believe can get full packets, the ESP8266 will clip packets at a certain point. So you can see the headers, you can see what type of packet it is, but you can't see the contents of the packet if it goes on for too long. So this is a really, really big limitation for what the ESP8266 can do, because that means that you can never, again, grab a handshake with this. So there have been all sorts of projects that like start out using the ESP8266, and then they realize like, oh, I can't work with that, and then they'll slap in an ESP32 as well and have like one control the other or something kind of wonky. So like there are some trade-offs between the ESP8266 and the ESP32. The primary difference is the ESP32 is not able to do deauthentication packets. It can't do packet injection or raw packet injection officially. There are some workarounds privately to do so, but officially there's no real way to do this. And then the ESP8266 can do this. The flip side is the ESP8266 cannot capture handshakes. So you can't use an ESP8266 to knock someone off a network and then capture the handshake, because it can only do one of those two things. So if you wanted to create something that could both right now kick somebody off and then capture a handshake, you would need to have both. So that's why it's important to note the differences between these two microcontrollers, because technically, if you had an ESP32, you probably could create something like Kismet, although it might not work quite as well because of it wouldn't maybe be as powerful. But I would say you probably could do something similar to that if you wanted to. But with the ESP8266, it would be impossible because of a bunch of different restrictions built into the chip. So great question, and kind of requires a nuanced answer. But these chips are super cool and interesting, and not everybody knows what the trade-offs are for using one versus the other. Like you might think you can grab the ESP32, start kicking people off networks, but no, you can't.
We have a question from the chat if you want to take it. Can
Yeah.
you explain port forwarding? I don't know exactly how it works. I've done it before. Do you know about the intricacies of how port forwarding works?
Yeah. So, do you know the difference between an internal, your like internal or an external network, Alex?
Yeah, so the IP address on your internal network, of course, is only for routing locally. If you wanted to do something like host your own website that you wanted to be accessible to like an outside network, so like if you wanted to be able to host like an IoT thing that you can access remotely, you would have to use port forwarding in order to connect your local IP to something external, sort of.
You do know port forwarding. That's exactly.
I
what
meant
it
like
is.
in more detail than that, because I feel like that's too basic. But,
No, I
yeah.
mean that's basically what it is. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
well, I've used it before for like IoT stuff, for like hosting a website on my Raspberry Pi.
yeah, so typically you'll have an internal network and an external network. And the external network is the internet, and the internal network is your home network. And there's a difference between the IP addressing in this, where your router does something called net address translation, and it's kind of trying to figure out like what the internal address is versus the external address to be able to reliably deliver information. But this internal network will change all the time, and the point of this is you never know what internal IP address a device is going to have. It might leave and come back. Somebody else might take that IP address. So because you can't reliably predict where an internal device is going to be on the network, it makes it really difficult to access it from the outside internet. So this is a problem for a lot of people who want to be able to do something like tunnel into their network or access something from the outside internet that is a local resource. And the answer for this is usually making sure that there's a rule built into the router that says, hey, for this device, take this port and basically forward it to the outside internet as though it was my own port. So if somebody is addressing a request to the router and they ask to talk on a certain port, the router will be like, oh, I know where this goes, and just turn around and route that over to the device that wants to be exposed to the internet. Now, why would that be a bad idea, Alex?
Just exposing it to the internet?
Yeah, just putting all your internal stuff like raw out there on the internet.
Because now this gives like a whole bunch of new vectors for possibly being attacked if some of these devices are exploitable.
Yeah, could you find
And
this?
very
Could you
much
find that
accessible.
device perhaps on Google?
Probably, yeah. There's even a whole search engine dedicated to scraping through IoT devices that are just like left wide open.
Which is called what?
I believe it's Shodan, right?
It is Shodan.
Yeah, it is
So
Shodan.
if you port forward your internal, any internal process out to the raw internet, Shodan's going to come along and index it and make it publicly searchable and very, very easy to find. And in that scan, it's also going to look for vulnerabilities. So it's going to look and see if you are running the most up-to-date version of a particular server. Maybe you're not. Maybe this is an old project or you just don't update it for a very long time. Well, guess what? Now it is searchable, and the moment an exploit comes for that service that you're running and exposing to the internet, you have a map directly back to your device that you've put onto the internet that allows anybody to blast that malware to your device in a very automated way. So port forwarding is basically poking holes in the firewall and opening up ports. Yes, actually,
much.
that's probably the shortest answer I could say. It's poking holes in the firewall and saying this port goes here, make a direct connection, and you can include some extra rules, like for example, like making it so there's a limited number of connections or limiting the number of IP addresses that can connect. And in fact, that might be smart. Like if you use a VPN and you're able to tunnel specifically into something, that's probably a better idea than just letting your ports hang out on the internet, because somebody will find them and start tickling around and find something. So yeah, while that is the way that port forwarding works, I typically do not recommend it. Alex, what is an alternative to port forwarding if you wanted to expose a project to the internet?
I think just use like a service to host whatever project it is that you want to work with. Personally, I use 000webhost.com. This is not sponsored, but I'm going to go ahead and rep them. It's a great website for getting started with basically web hosting. So if you have like a free website you want to host on their platform, they allow you to do that. They give you backend access to certain things. So if you wanted to run complicated projects with like PHP or something, you can also do that. You can use it for IoT, a whole bunch of different other purposes. If you also want like a package that like just out of the box is more secure than figuring out how to start doing port forwarding on your own, platforms like Dataplicity for the Raspberry Pi let you set up these projects really easily with like just a few lines of bash on your Linux terminal, and they do all the setup for you. It's pretty secure. I'd highly recommend those if you want to get started with setting up your own project.
Yeah, I would definitely say a VPS or something that allows you to expose something that can easily be shut down
Yeah.
and terminated that doesn't go to your stuff would be a better way of doing this. Like using virtualized systems is almost always better in this regard. So please do not port forward like your printer to the internet. You will print stuff. Stuff will print. But I personally know of an exploit that will overwrite the screen of the printer so many times that it becomes impossible for it to display any information. So there's attacks against printers that take advantage of manufacturing flaws. And if you connect your printer to the internet, bad stuff will happen to it. So the same is true of pretty much any IoT device. Just be careful what you put out there and look for other alternatives. So we have a really good question. I've been doing software stuff only. Can you guys give some advice on starting with microcontrollers?
Shoot.
I can.
All right. You
Yeah,
can start on
so
this one.
I would say there are so many projects on places like, well, of course, Nullbyte, but also random nerd tutorials on just taking a microcontroller that you can find for super cheap and getting a really fun, interesting project up and running very quickly. I've personally done stuff also with like MicroPython and CircuitPython where getting started controlling NeoPixels is just so fun and cool. And you can do a lot of art projects that would get people who might not usually be interested in programming to be really excited about it. So I would say some of the stuff that isn't like, Wi-Fi hacking related, but it's just like simple CircuitPython or a simple MicroPython that lets you get started with just writing simple code to a device and lighting up a whole string of LEDs to whatever color you want, doing patterns, doing like all this very specific and cool stuff with math to create art. That's something that makes a lot of people really connect with this and feel like they have what it takes to become, somebody that works with hardware. So I would say those sorts of projects that use more simple languages that get you started with that, they require a little bit of knowledge for getting, the firmware to the device to make it a MicroPython running device. But then after that, they can be relatively simple depending on what you're using. And I hear, again, the Raspberry Pi Pico is pretty good for that. So maybe we should check it out. But yeah, I would say that would be my pick. There's some more complicated projects that use Arduino, where Arduino is a lot less welcoming than MicroPython, but you can get started relatively quickly in Flash projects that other people have created over to it with a couple simple modifications. Especially if you have a software background, this might be a good place to start because you can reuse a lot of what you might have learned with C++, because Arduino is basically C++, and a lot of the things you will have learned will carry over. What would you say?
Also, the example sketches that are included on the Arduino platform are super helpful. So, like right out of the box, when you just like download the Arduino IDE to start programming the chip, it comes with a whole ton of different example code sketches that you can upload to the board. So, if you wanted to interface with some sensors or something like that, chances are there's already software written for it that you can get started with. And I think there's a lot of really good documentation for the Arduino platform. So even if you're not too familiar with how to write C code specifically, you can basically just figure out like what to copy and paste to get started with your project, or take a look at existing projects to figure out and reverse engineer sort of how they work to create your own.
Definitely. So this isn't so much a question, but it is a statement. Would love to see a wardrobe with a FPV race drone compared to a DJI. You would get way more control and could get into smaller and tighter spaces. I think it'd be too sexy to do a wardrobe, but a ward drive,
Yeah,
that would be
definitely.
awesome. So I'm assuming that's what you mean. And Alex and I have been talking about how you can more precisely detect the location of like a client device, like a cell phone, or an access point by maybe getting more data and then using some of the Python processing we've been showing off on Hack5 to geolocate something and plot it on a map. So if we were able to get a lot of data and really get into tight spaces in a building in particular, then it would probably be a lot more possible to locate the specific part of the specific floor where everybody basically was. So that's a really cool idea and sounds like a great excuse to buy a new drone. So maybe if someone could recommend us a good one to build or buy, we might try that. Alex has been getting pretty good at flying the drone. So if we got an even faster drone that's slightly more resistant to crashing, then that would be, or at least survivable, then that would be great.
I have another question. What is a neat distro you've seen lately? What is the one we talked about last week? I forget if that one was even interesting.
It wasn't.
Okay, never mind.
Not that one.
We talked about a different one that was pretty interesting though.
So for me, I still think that Manjaro is really neat. I haven't been I've been using macOS for a little bit because I have editing stuff to do, but I still really like running Manjaro on the Raspberry Pi. It's super stable. It works great with all the hacking stuff I'm trying to do, and you can tell people you run Arch constantly. So that's going to be my pick. What about you?
My personal favorite distro right now is probably Ubuntu. It just has like a ton of easy out of the box software that I can use. And most of the software I'm looking to run already comes or runs pretty easily on Ubuntu, so I have no complaints about it.
That actually,
And I use it as my primary right now, so.
Oh yeah, that's a question coming up later, so you'll be asked to explain yourself probably. So one question is how to start a cybersecurity company. Well, first you got to come up with $1 million idea, and if you do, call me. But really, like, in order to start a cybersecurity company, you need an idea good enough that people obviously will pay for it, and you need to have conducted an experiment that proves that people will in fact pay for it who are not your immediate friends and family. If you've passed that smell test, then it might be time to see whether your idea is scalable. And if it's not, then you have a small business. Congratulations. If it is scalable, then you get to the point where more money just equals more profit, and you can prove that to people. And at that point, you could probably start talking to people about getting investment. I'm not a business advisor, but I don't know what your idea is, if it's a big idea, if it's a small idea, if it's a medium idea. But generally, try to make your idea as scalable as possible and try to make sure you can prove it without $1 million. Because if somebody has to spend $1 million on your experiment to see if it even works, nobody's going to want to do it. So if you're already making money with your business, or if you have a experiment that proves your core concept, then you're probably in a good position to start making your cybersecurity business. But if not, then I would maybe do some more beta testing before committing a bunch of money or time to it. All right.
We have a question from Zam. So he says the new ESP32C3 is finally available to acquire, which is based off the RISC architecture. Have you managed to get your hands on it? What are your thoughts on this as an update to the ESP8266? Do you know if this is the same one as the new ESP32S2?
No.
That has,
the
okay.
C3, I guess.
I haven't seen this one yet.
From context clues and from a little bit of research before, it's RISC-V based. So that's what the appeal is that it's able to just act more like the kind of processor we're used to working with.
Right.
So we can probably, I'm slowly pulling it up. We can probably switch over to my screen as it loads.
I haven't seen the new lines of ESP32s, but there's a few that have come out.
Yeah, so people that are following the ESP32, like the ESP32 is a very popular platform, but it lacked some stuff that people really wish it had. And Espressif, the company that makes it, has kind of like rolled out these things that people want, not in one like killer package, but in like 3 separate like new ESPs that are designed to replace different things. So the one I've really been looking at is the ESP32S2, which has native USB and allows us to do all sorts of interesting stuff. And I actually just found it in a D1 Mini, like this form factor, on AliExpress last night at like 2 in the morning.
What? That's crazy.
Yeah, so we're going to be getting the S2 to take a look at its like native USB capabilities and see what advantages it offers over like previous platforms like the ESP32. But as Zam kind of indicated, the ESP32 C3 is supposed to be more of a replacement for the ESP8266. And so you can see ESP8266 launched in 2014, and the ESP32 was in 2016. So this is the update in 2020 and 2021 to these microcontrollers. They have, let's see, security, which is definitely something that they were lacking a little bit of before. I think like last week we were talking about a huge like vulnerability in like the Bluetooth stack, and then like they just get hit all the time with security stuff, and that sucks because a lot of these IoT projects that are based on the ESP32 don't get updated that often. So they've definitely tried to make this more secure. So just the description is ESP32 C3 is a single core 32-bit RISC-V based MCU with 400 kilobytes of SRAM, which is capable of running 160 megahertz and is integrated 2.4 gigahertz. No 5.
Dang it.
And Bluetooth 5 LE with long-range support. 22 programmable GPIO pins with support for a bunch of stuff. So this is targeted at the ESP8266. Like, if we're comparing this to an ESP32S like 2, this is not that great. But if we're comparing it to the previous generation of ESP8266, this is actually a big improvement. We get Bluetooth, like we get a bunch of other stuff. Again, do we have gripes? Yes, there are no 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, which lots of stuff either requires or we want to use in order to do hacking stuff. That is a bummer. I really wish they had that. But overall, they've tried to improve the security of it. So they've done secure boot, flash encryption, digital signature. I don't know what world controller is. That sounds a little Machiavellian. There's a new peripheral called World Controller. 2 execution environments fully isolated from each other. Depending on the configuration, this can be used to implement. Okay, all right. So
Fancy
fuses?
wording.
Yeah, you got fuses you can set or something, whatever. So yeah, so this is definitely something that a lot of people are going to be interested in because it just means you have a lot more to work with. But unfortunately, because I've been paying attention to the other one, I don't have as much to say on this. Alex, I'm sure next week you can come back with some more stuff
Definitely.
to say about it. All right.
Okay, we have another question in the chat. What is the ESP32? So I think we covered that a little. It's a small microcontroller that has access to both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So this is really useful if you want to get started with creating a very cheap like IoT platform or something to control basic stuff like you can control lights, relays, anything like that. It's also accessible through both Arduino and MicroPython, so it's pretty easy to get started with creating your own projects or looking at existing projects already out there. The reason why we like it is there's some exploits you can do over Wi-Fi that we've been taking a look at. More geared towards the ESP8266 though, but you can do stuff like deauthentication, you can create packets, stuff like that.
Oh, wow. Somebody's trying to get us to talk about Dragon OS. I refuse to be drawn into this. I know what you're doing, and I won't do it. Okay, so Zam also mentions that RISC-V is open source. And so for anybody who wants to get started with like open source stuff, I definitely recommend like RISC-V. Like it's something that a lot of programmers are really excited about. And Zam also says that we might be able to get access to the ESP8266. I'm assuming like he means like the radio, the same way that we can do, the ESP32C3, the same way we have with the ESP8266. So maybe we would be able to do like deauthentication frames or something like that, which would be really cool. Although the original way that this was done was my friend Stefan went back and took a look at older versions of the development kit for this microcontroller and saw that previous versions had allowed for the kind of behavior that he wanted to do, which was raw packet injection. So you could basically construct packets from scratch and then send them. And in later iterations, the manufacturer disallowed this. So the fact that, it's 2020 and they're definitely going to try to disallow this, well, I mean, it is open source though. So maybe that will provide a faster route for people to hack this microcontroller to do lots of awesome stuff that the manufacturer didn't want you to do, but hey, we want to do it, so it's fun. Somebody asked, how is Mike? Mike Buckby is great, and he is simply too busy, unfortunately, to continue doing the certification study stream, at least for the foreseeable future. If you're talking about cryptozoology, Mike, then he's, doing his thing, finding Bigfoot. He's fine. But yeah. So let's go ahead and take a question from the channel.
This one says, "Hi, awesome. If the could storage the deauth/auth packets as .cap format for Aircrack NG will be cool, bro." So I think he wants to use Aircrack NG to store deauthentication packets as a cap format. I think what he's getting at is just detecting for deauthentication using the Aircrack suite.
Little context on this. This was in response to your video on using the ESP8266. So we just talked about the limitation with that.
Okay, that's a bit confusing. But yes, we are able to detect deauthentication packets on the ESP8266. I haven't worked with the cap format on it, but I know that Stefan, or rather Spacehoon, wrote a software that allows you to create capture files that are compatible with like Wireshark from the ESP8266. So I could take a look into that,
it's called the Arduino PCAP library. So if you want to take a look at that, it allows you to capture PCAP files or cap files on the ESP8266 or on the ESP32. So you can use it as basically a monitor mode receiver for wireless communications. You can even read this in Wireshark. I've gotten it working on the ESP32 before. Does it work great? No, it doesn't, but it works. So if you have a project that needs this, you can take a look at how well it'll work. Spacehoon, I think, is the author of that library, and it's very useful if you want to use one of these devices as a sniffer.
Should we take another question, or do you see one in the chat?
All right. I also apologize to the person asking about Dragon OS. I just don't respond to any question about an unknown thing called Dragon because I know what comes after that. But yeah, if it is focused on SDR, then maybe we'll check it out. Okay. So it's not a sore subject. Is it possible to hide yourself from Shodan when port forwarding? It's really hard. And the problem is like if you're expecting security from obscurity after you're exposing something to the internet, like you can try to put it on like a wonky port, and you can try to like hide the service as another service or whatever else. But like really, like you're taking a pretty big risk when you're exposing something directly to the internet. Ask me how I know. One time we were doing a video about security cameras, and somehow the security camera managed to configure itself to expose its like port 80 to the just raw internet. So while we were watching one of my Nullbyte videos, I just idly saw that we leaked my IP address, and I was like, I wonder if anything bad happened. So I took my IP address, plugged it into the browser, and instantly saw the outside of my house because the security camera was just being forwarded raw to the outside world. So anybody who watched my Nullbyte video, which had like 20,000 views, and plugged that IP address into their browser could just look at my neighborhood. So port forwarding, unexpected stuff happens. Like devices can configure themselves in weird ways. It's just something that I try to avoid if at all possible because there have been a couple scares, I guess we'll say.
We'll take a question from apparently one of my videos again.
Yes.
So this one says, please do the same, but instead with an ESP32, that would be absolutely awesome.
Yeah, again, we covered this a bit, but it would be possible to do things like Bluetooth.
Right.
So can you explain what might be good about like war driving Bluetooth devices and what we might find?
I believe Bluetooth, do they do MAC address randomization?
Not all of them.
Okay.
So some devices do, but most devices do not. Like your headphones almost never do MAC address randomization, stuff like that.
I can't think of a particular one-up of Bluetooth right now, but I do know that like on some devices, it's entirely impossible to completely shut down like Bluetooth low energy and stuff like that.
Like car stereos?
Yeah, I even saw like on some Apple devices, BLE's not entirely turned off, even if you were to shut off Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and like turn off your phone and stuff like that. So they were able to detect that using war driving. But no, I can't think of any particular...
Headphones? Car stereos?
I guess you have
Bluetooth
a more
beacons.
range of devices that you can pick up on.
Basically any device that uses Bluetooth as a peripheral, like, and you would be amazed at the stuff that has Bluetooth turned on. Laptops often announce their full name. Like one of our roommates has a ThinkPad that is proudly announcing its name all across America. And if you were to search for Bluetooth devices with that name, you would see basically the entire route of us driving around with him in the backseat on the computer. Because when I'm war driving, his device is constantly broadcasting his name because it doesn't manage to randomize the Bluetooth MAC address. So police body cameras do not randomize the Bluetooth MAC address that they have when they're turned on. Police smart holsters, where if they pull their gun out, it calls dispatch. Those also never randomize their MAC address. So by using the ESP32, we would have the benefit of being able to do war driving for peripherals. And nowadays, there's so many things that you might not expect. Again, like car stereos, which are constantly trying to pair with the Bluetooth device. Those are always on, never change, for the most part, never change their MAC address, and allows you to track vehicular traffic if that's what you wanted to do. So there's actually tons of different applications for Bluetooth war driving because so many people rely on peripherals that never change their MAC addresses, that the potential for tracking people with this is as good or even better, I would say, than for tracking Wi-Fi devices, because Wi-Fi devices are much more generic and better protected, whereas because there have been fewer attacks against Bluetooth devices, tracking them has become relatively easy. So that's the primary advantage of using an ESP32 is you can now get data about all these peripherals that people carry on them on a daily basis that are broadcasting some sort of Bluetooth pairing signal. All right,
We'll
next
take
question.
a comment from one of my videos. Amazon links aren't very hackser.
Yeah, we just kind of figure that you guys don't want to wait like a month and a half to go to AliExpress, but we could give you AliExpress links, like if that's like more hackser for you. I mean, frankly, we just try to make it as simple as possible. You'll note that we didn't put affiliate codes on our Amazon links, which is actually dumb. So if we're not punk enough for you for giving you the links and stripping off the affiliate codes, then I don't know what else we can do. You can always look these products online in places that'll take longer to deliver for cheaper. But again, most people are pretty upset when they find out that their project that they're super excited to start is going to take like 2 months to get here because it's being shipped from China. So let's keep that in mind.
Do you want to take another, or do you have one from the chat?
Let's take another.
Okay, the next one is yet another comment insulting me. what's with the hood up? So as I
I figure it's time to address it on it.
As I explained on one of my videos, there's actually a family of field mice that recently moved in, and I've had to harbor them since they're seeking political asylum.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, they've just been living up in my hair for the past few months, and to protect their identities, I've had to wear this hood. So it's a very touchy subject.
Yeah. So I would say a good 10% of all comments on Alex's videos are in relation to this. So we now have it out there. It's for the protection of the field mice. That's what it's for. All right, moving on.
Another question.
Yep.
Okay, what OS does he use? I use Ubuntu, as I mentioned before. Find it really easy to work with. There's tons of tutorials and documentation on how to fix things that get screwed up in Ubuntu, if that ever happens, which I'm very prone to doing since it's a Linux operating system. Ubuntu is just very, very easy to work with, and I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I also sign off on Ubuntu. It's as somebody who has to do a lot of Linux stuff and gets very frustrated if I'm using something that's too niche that doesn't have any good instructions for a particular error that I encounter while trying to install a package. Having so many people using a platform and doing scientific or hacker stuff with it means that there's lots of documentation for doing exotic stuff that you would want to try, but maybe don't want to spend a whole week tracking down some random weird error from a deprecated package. So just in terms of how well fleshed out it is for user experience, Ubuntu is one of the best experiences you can have trying to use Linux. And it's funny because a lot of people talk smack about Ubuntu, but if you're just trying to get something done, and it's not going to be your personal forever machine that you're in love with and have customized and set up just for you so nobody else could possibly use or decipher it, then it's a really good system. If you insist on having something that is only for you, that is customized deeply to its core, then there's lots of other options out there. But for having everything pre-installed and being easy to set new things up on, I would sign off on Ubuntu as well.
Scrolling through our comments.
So somebody also, I want to shout out to Packet Panda, who mentions that some models of Bluetooth headphones could be used to track their users, and this was the extremely concerning conclusion reached by a Norwegian student who cycled through them. I wonder if he was from the hackerspace I went to in Oslo, which is awesome, by the way. But anyway, Hackerjet is what that's called, and it's in an awesome building, and if you're ever in Oslo, you should check it out. But I'm not surprised, frankly. When I started doing research into this, I was considering doing a piece for Motherboard, and I reached out to the people who work at Axon, who is the company that makes Taser and then the cameras and then stuff that police wear. It's hey, do you guys randomize your MAC address? And they're like, ha, funny question, no. But because you asked, we're about to do that very soon in our new models, and we're so excited to do that because it's going to be great. Is there a bad thing you could do with that? Because you should tell us, because that would be bad. And I'm just just track their every movement, do they know that every movement can be tracked? And they're yeah, they don't, they walk around in uniforms, who cares? And I was all of them though? So it was a really interesting back and forth where I actually got to talk to the manufacturer, and they were legitimately, they were concerned about it. They're we're working on this, we're trying to fix it. Can you help us understand what's the worst that could happen here? So it was actually kind of encouraging to talk to a vendor who makes a product that's very important that currently wasn't doing MAC address randomization. And I imagine after that conversation and after what they told me about their new products having MAC address randomization, this is now being fixed. But still, it's very interesting to see that these devices, your headphones, anything with the Bluetooth connection, any peripheral you use to connect with Bluetooth, that you might even forget that the thing has a Bluetooth connection. You might not use it, but if it broadcasts Bluetooth, then it can be tracked. And while a lot of devices try to randomize the MAC address to prevent this, like your phone, for example, not everything does. And sometimes the randomization is so bad that they might as well not try, because it's very easy to reverse.
I have a question. How can I detect Wi-Fi jamming?
That's a really good question. So there's a couple projects that can visualize Wi-Fi. I'm assuming you mean deauthentication and disassociation. The best way is I did a fork of Spacehoon's deauth detector that detects both deauthentication and disassociation packets and displays different, lights up different LEDs. And what's interesting is different programs create different patterns. So if you're using BSideNG, it'll start flashing both deauthentication and disassociation because it sends both. If you're using AirPlay NG, I believe is a program, then it'll only show the particular type of packet that you're sending. It won't switch back and forth. So you can visualize that sort of jamming and also kind of guess which program is being used by just routing an ESP8266 that's reading and listening for packets and have it say, all right, if you see this type of packet or that type of packet, then light up this LED or that LED. Super simple. If you don't want to do a microcontroller project or have it visualized, you can just open Wireshark. Go to the channel you suspect is being deauthenticated and write a filter looking for deauthentication or disassociation packets, and you should only see those ones appear on the screen. Personally, I created a filter that highlights these with orange and yellow, one for deauthentication, one for disassociation. So if I'm looking through everything and I start seeing giant patches of yellow and orange, I know, okay, something is being attacked on my network. And it becomes very, very obvious as soon as I look through the packet. So I would say for just like, if you want to stick it on your wall and forget about it until it starts flashing, I would use the deauth detector. If you want to just analyze something that's happening currently, definitely Wireshark, and just write a rule and then highlight the packets so you can see them very visually. And I think that it'll be easy to figure out whether or not you're actually under attack.
We have a question from Pedro. Hi, I recently switched to Linux but can't find any remote access tools like REMCOS, a tool I used on Windows. Can you recommend any RATs for Linux that are also reliable? I haven't worked with any, but do you know of any tools?
No, I haven't done remote access tools in 2 years. So you don't, I'm going to be like PowerShell Empire, but that's not even for that. So no, that's because that's for Windows.
VNC.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I don't have a good one,
either.
and I don't want to get in trouble recommending one that sucks.
Let's see. Heard of IoT vaccine passports? No, we haven't. Or unless you have.
It's supposed to be like a hardware vaccine passport. I don't have enough details to talk about it, but it seems interesting. If you got a link, drop it. We'll take a look. But
Scott D shows remorse for his comment about Michael, who was immediately replaced in the next video after he sarcastically commented something mean. Well, Scott, your cryptozoology expert has been replaced.
All right, let's take one from the video.
We don't have any more video
Oh,
questions,
okay, cool.
so I'm going to scroll through the chat, see if we have any more.
Yeah, so one question was, how can I bridge multiple routers together? So it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to create a mesh network using traditional routers, then something like OpenWRT or something that's like open source and has lots of documentation is probably your best bet for getting started, because otherwise fragmentation among hardware vendors is going to be your worst enemy. It really comes down to, like, there's too many different types of software running on too many different types of routers to answer this question well, unless, again, you're just using something open source like that. An alternative to that is there's an ESP8266 and ESP32 NAT router project that does allow for meshing, meaning that they will connect to each other. So you could theoretically have like 6 of these microcontrollers all strung out in a line that are barely overlapping in signal. And if one of them on one end had a Wi-Fi connection, then all of them technically would, because they would be able to forward that throughout the entire network. Would it be slow? Yes. Would there be probably some good latency? Probably. But it does work, and if you're looking for a project that's a little bit more like guerrilla, then I would say that would be a good place to look.
2 new questions, or rather questions. I think we covered one of these already. What type of Linux do you guys prefer to use? I personally prefer Ubuntu.
It depends. So for me, if I am running a security thing and like that's what I'm doing that day, I'll use Kali Linux just because
Awesome.
everything's pre-installed and I'm very comfortable with it. If I'm using a Raspberry Pi, I'll usually use Manjaro now, just because I like to experiment with Manjaro and it runs so smoothly on not microcontrollers, but on the Raspberry Pi that it's just a really great experience.
Recommended laptops for hacking.
I really like my ThinkPad. It's ancient and huge, but it still betrays me less than this MacBook Pro.
The newer ThinkPads are also cool. I have a rather old one as well, but I'd like to get a newer ThinkPad. The Dell XPS also offers a lot of processing power also for GPU stuff, so if you're looking to get into basic password cracking, that might be helpful. You can also hook up stuff like an external GPU if you want to tether more processing power to it.
Okay, so one question was, new here, I'm wondering what is your guys' background work-wise? So I worked in security, but physical security, but also some digital security, managing security at a really busy music venue in Los Angeles. And then I got into startups and technology. And then after that, I started writing for hacking publications and then eventually teaching people how to get started with hacking. I still do that, but I don't go too heavily into, like, I'm not a pen tester, for example. I've done pen testing stuff, but it's not how I get paid. So for me, I mostly do educational content, reach out to people who are a lot smarter than me and have them teach, or either teach me or teach everyone how to use the thing that they made. So I have a couple tools that I've made myself, but for the most part, I learn how tools that other people make work and then help explain them for people who are just getting started. And Alex?
I mostly got started doing like hobbyist level stuff with like microcontrollers, Raspberry Pi, that general like area of programming, hacking, and things like that. But I've recently been getting more into video production. I started my own YouTube channel, attempted to make a website where I put up tutorials and things like that. But recently I've been working with both Hack5 and Security Forward to put out more videos. Some hardware platforms that we're also creating and documenting. Mostly focused around like cheap microcontrollers. That's mostly what I've been working with.
Do you guys want to use that Jetson Nano cluster? I've seen it before. All right,
Yes,
you explain
yes,
then.
please.
Yeah.
Well, the Jetson Nano is pretty awesome. I worked with it exactly once, and then I broke it because the external module on it's like super fragile and not really held in place. But we used it for like training AI models on my robotics team back in high school, since it's like it offers like a ton of power and leverage over something like the Raspberry Pi that's not necessarily dedicated to training AI as like a microcontroller. So yes, we would love to have access to your Jetson Nano cluster if possible.
Yeah, that leads into another good question, which is why/what do you actually use your Raspberry Pi for? I've been racking my brain and don't know why you would actually use it unless you are dropping and leaving it.
It's just like the premise of it being a disposable tool is very appealing. Like if I want a quick Linux box that I can just like pop up, use, and then possibly destroy if I've done something sketchy on it.
All right.
I'm just kidding. I do like that it's very easy to tinker with without having to worry about screwing up expensive hardware. Also, the ability to interface with hardware modules really easily. Like you can just buy these platforms, these little things called hats that you can stack directly on top and get access to like different sensor modules and stuff like that. Make it super plug and play. Just the ability to run Linux tools for very cheaply and also just like, I guess use it as a disposable tool is very appealing.
Okay. So now I want to make like a list of my favorite Raspberry Pi projects. There's so many cool, ridiculous things you can do with a Raspberry Pi. I just have to say, like, just look around. Did you know that you can take over a radio station locally and play whatever you want on a Raspberry Pi? It's ridiculous. Like one time I was riding in an Uber and I didn't like the radio station, so I just logged into my SSH into my Raspberry Pi in my backpack, set the radio station to the radio station I wanted it to play over, and because I had a wire soldered to one of the pins on the Raspberry Pi, I was able to play my song over the song that was playing on the stereo. This is a Raspberry Pi with a wire like soldered to it. So like if you don't think that there's cool projects on the Raspberry Pi, I guarantee you haven't found the right one yet. There's such cool things that can be done with this platform. That is probably my favorite weird one, is you can turn it into a radio broadcaster by like modulating things on a particular pin. And depending on the length of the wire you attach to it, you can increase or decrease the range. I recommend you don't attach a wire to it, because if you do so too much, then it becomes illegal because you're interfering on lots of bands. Like when I did an analysis of the actual frequencies this was broadcasting on, it was like echoing on like 8 different other frequencies than the one we intended because it wasn't using a filter. So actually trying to make this super powerful, it's not a good idea. But if you want about a foot's worth of range where you're only going to be bothering, devices within a foot or so, it's a great proof of concept and it actually works. So that was a really cool one I did with the Raspberry Pi. I was able to, plug in an RTL SDR and listen in on radio frequencies. So I used the Raspberry Pi as like a kind of like a signals intelligence thing where I could listen in on Wi-Fi, radio, and lots of other stuff. And then without adding a single thing, the Raspberry Pi is probably the best platform I know of for Wi-Fi hacking, just straight out of the box. Especially the Raspberry Pi 3, or I think the 3B. The one that has both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz has a wireless network adapter inside of it, or a wireless chipset that is compatible with Kali Linux. You can do all sorts of awesome hacking stuff with it, and you don't need to plug in anything else. It actually works on the board. So is it powerful enough to do like password cracking? Like if you want to wait a while and you don't care about it getting caught, sure.
A really long time,
Yeah,
actually.
but I mean, if you're looking for just bad default credentials or like relatively short password lists, then like it's actually pretty useful. You can really have it go after a ton of Wi-Fi networks in a dense urban area, get hashes for all of them, and then like maybe get the worst 30%. Which if you manage to get like 15 or 20 different network password hashes, and you're getting like 30% of them, that's pretty good. I mean, you're getting access to a ton of networks at that point using this really, really cheap device. So for Wi-Fi hacking, the Raspberry Pi is awesome. For weird projects that you could like repurpose to do other stuff other than what it's intended for, the Raspberry Pi is awesome. You can also use it as a pirate box, which somebody shouted out in the chat. Huge props to that, because the pirate box is super cool, and the pirate box is basically something that turns it into a Wi-Fi access point that also acts as a server that hosts a chat, a file drop, and lots of other stuff that allows people to share files or use it as like a digital like a community board or like a poster board where like you would be posting notices. Some ideas for it were in a disaster where data and electricity were cut off, you could use it to start a database of people that were missing or people that were found. Like there's lots of different applications for what you could use this infrastructure for. So the Pirate Box is really cool. There's video monitoring projects where you can have multiple like ESP32 cameras that are super cheap, spread around, all reporting back to like a DVR system. It's super, super cool. So yeah, I think a lot of people in the chat are also sounding off. But I would also say Octoprint is an amazing project. And the Gina, the person behind it, is also super cool. I believe I had her in a class I did at C3 in Germany, which is just a random, weird, cool coincidence. But ever since I installed Octoprint and started using it to control my 3D printer, it's just so much better than just using the printer by itself. So there's lots of ways you can use your Raspberry Pi to get started with really interesting projects. There are people that make drones out of Raspberry Pis. Like there's all sorts of stuff you can do with it. And yeah, I think that I've kind of moved on to microcontrollers because I love the challenge of working with a really restricted platform. And frankly, Raspberry Pis are too easy for me now. It's like I can just cut straight to the chase and just do what I want. And it doesn't give me the same like feeling of satisfaction as making a microcontroller do something that like it's barely supposed to. Let's see.
Someone asked, I was watching some documentary and it mentioned testing a malware on an isolated Raspberry Pi. Can this actually be done? Yes. There's even a ton of platforms available specifically for creating an exploitable machine for the Raspberry Pi. If you wanted to deploy malware that's already written, like presumably to run on Linux, the Raspberry Pi would be the perfect application for this because, as we mentioned before, just as like a disposable, cheap platform, this would be a really great way to get started if you want to do something like testing malware without having any real effect on like damaging your primary computer or something like
that. Sorry, I was reading another one. I bypass match filter in university and get static IP, which university gives to everyone's device. Then I put it in Android manually. I got connected to the to the university internet without Mac spoofing. Explain. You just explained it. Not only is that smart, but it seems like it works. I mean, sorry, I'm not 100% networking guy. So if you want like a deeper explanation of how that works, then I am afraid I can't give it to you. But I am impressed. So there is that. One response I would have to the previous question was when you're deploying malware, it's not just going to go off the same on every device. Like typically, malware authors will try to make it so that their creation will only drop its full payload on the device it's intended to. So if this is supposed to go off on like a Windows device, then you're probably not going to be able to get it to go off the way that it would on a different platform. So this is also a problem with virtualization. If you're trying to create a virtual environment to analyze malware in, then very often it will check for that as like the first thing. And then it'll shut itself off if it finds itself on a platform that it's not supposed to be on. So, and that's usually written by malware authors to prevent like reverse engineering. Again, not really my area specifically. I think there was another question that was asking, is malware analysis are important in hacking, or is it a different thing? I try, but it's too hard, so explain. I need help on it, and which tool is best for malware analysis? Please answer the question. I will, because you asked so politely. So malware analysis is only important if you're going to be an analyst or an incident responder or something like that. Is it helpful? Yeah. But like, are there lots of people who work in ethical hacking or cybersecurity that know almost nothing about reverse engineering, but a lot about other subjects? Absolutely. Like, I focus on Wi-Fi and OSINT specifically, and that's my area, and I'm very good in those areas, but I really don't know much about reverse engineering because I don't have the programming background. If you're a computer science person and you know a lot about the way programs work, then, absolutely, like that path might make sense for you. But if you're somebody who focuses on networks, or if you're somebody who focuses on a different area, then, it's really not going to be that important to your career path. So if it's something you're not good at and you don't like it, then don't do it. Like, find another area in hacking that you like, because there's plenty of other stuff out there. And the people that do reverse engineering might not even be the best paid people, like in cybersecurity. It might actually be the salespeople. Who knows? Like, or people who do something that you might find a lot more interesting. So I'm not, I'm just saying, focus on the things that you really enjoy and like in cybersecurity, especially if you're struggling with another area, because there's so many different parts of cybersecurity you could get into that malware analysis might literally never come up in your job, depending on what it is. Has not come up in mine.
I have a question. What do you guys think of the Pinebook Pro? Don't we have one of those?
No.
We do have some sort of open source computer of some sort. But the Pinebook's pretty cool.
Yeah, we don't have a Pinebook Pro. We got like the Raspberry Pi 400, and then we got like some other like full-on computer. But we don't have
some
a
weird
Pinebook Pro
Linux
yet.
computer.
Mm-hmm.
When do you normally stream?
Well, today. So we try to stream at 12 o'clock Mountain Time on Tuesdays, and then we also go live usually around 1 p.m. On Fridays. And we also every other week do a stream on Wednesdays. But we try to schedule them in advance. So if you subscribe and also set a notification, then you will be notified when we're about to go live. Because we do schedule them and we try to keep to that schedule unless something forces us to push back a little bit, which sometimes it does. But usually we try to go live at the same time every week. So that's Tuesdays, every other week Wednesdays, and then always Fridays. Is malware analysis used in penetration testing? I love penetration testing. All right, well, I mean, sure. But really only if that's specifically your job. Like, typically you'll be following some sort of like kill chain style methodology where you'll be looking for vulnerabilities and hitting them with whatever tools real attackers would use. That doesn't really involve a lot of like reverse engineering, like unless you're just making your own tools based off of real tools that you just find online, which if you do that, you should get paid a lot of money for it. So, for penetration testing, I would say most pen testers don't typically find themselves doing a lot of reverse engineering. It's just, like something that people who are good at and enjoy doing can definitely find a job doing if that's what their thing is.
Yeah, because with most penetration testers, they're the ones like trying to break into something else rather than having to deal with malware that's being loaded onto them instead, I suppose.
There is a hack list that shows live InfoSec streamers, including this channel. If you're interested, hell yeah, that sounds great. One comment that I just have to agree with: I hate Windows Subsystem for Linux so much. It had such potential. I cannot stress how much I agree with you. We attempted to do a video on how cool Windows Subsystem for Linux was, and we swiftly found out it wasn't. And the whole stream is us just getting more and more upset with it as we go on and try different things and find out that it doesn't work. So I never recommend people use Windows Subsystem for Linux in place of True Linux, just because like no matter what you're trying to teach, there's going to be some weird restriction you didn't anticipate. There's a very small list of things that work the same on it. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it. But all right, let's do our final question. As an apology for Urban Guerrilla Communications for my earlier misinterpretation of the Dragon OS. What's your take on the latest event with Proton Mail and the Swiss government, Alex, as an avid user and supporter of Proton Mail?
Well, I'm sorry that you don't like Proton Mail. I don't actually keep up to date on the Proton Mail news, so I haven't heard of this.
Well, let me tell you. So a Paris-based like student climate action group had their information subpoenaed from Proton Mail, which apparently was logging their IP addresses.
Interesting. I would never know of something bad happening to Proton Mail, my favorite email.
Yeah, so it looks like what the person behind Proton Mail was saying on Twitter was that they are a legal Swiss company, so they have to provide with legal requests from the Swiss government. In this case, they got a request from another EU country that said, like, you know, these people are committing crimes in our country that you now have to provide evidence on, and they began logging IP addresses. So apparently, according to them, like, this is not standard practice that they log everybody's IP address, but they have now, if you make any European country angry, they can effectively send a secret notice to Proton Mail, which will begin logging your IP address and using the account to collect data and evidence on you.
That's terrifying.
Well, I mean, you know, when you think about the flaw of Proton Mail is it exists in a country and is subject to laws. So in this case, like, you can't really expect like perfect privacy and perfect security from something that is running in a country that, you know, is subjected to the rules of the European Union. If any EU country submits a request, even if it's a sketchy European country, they can still have this information forced out of Proton Mail. So it's just another example where even if you have this like promise of privacy, email, I'm seeing lots of privacy advocates on Twitter today saying, if you have something that you want to send to someone and you want it to be private, don't put it in email. Just don't. Like, it doesn't work anymore for that kind of use. You might, like, some privacy advocates were saying, you might as well use Gmail, not because it's more private, but just because any other account is probably about as private. So, you know, that's unfortunately, my takeaway from this incident with Proton Mail is, like, Proton Mail is only private until somebody tells them to start tracking you. Like, the email address is either connected to something legal or something like that. And at that point, it can become a place where information is collected about you. Okay, I think that is all we have time for today. And thank you everyone in the chat for carrying the day with your excellent questions. I'm always impressed that we get such new and good questions on the live stream. And if you had a question today that wasn't previously answered, please make sure to put it on the YouTube channel. You can find it at SecurityFWD on YouTube, or you can go to hackingwithfriends.com. And again, if you want to be here for all of our live streams, then make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because I noticed there have been some people that subscribe that say they don't get notified when we go live, but the notification bell should let you know. So, all right, that's all we have. Alex, thank you for joining us again today, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.